Sun's over there, so you got to face this way.
First off, how many of you guys are not from Dallas or visiting here? Okay, welcome to Nut Country.
Thank you.
You guys know the basic story. Bill laid out a bunch of stuff. I agree with what he said. Almost all of it, maybe 4 or 5 things.
Okay.
I don't. I agree with your points that you made. And you guys know the basic story. He covered it. Oswald. I wish we were at the scene right now. Oswald supposedly walking east on 10th Street. Tippit supposedly also walking east, driving east on 10th Street, according to the Warner report. And he sees the back of his head, somehow connects him with the description on the vague description on the radio, and then pulls him over, and then isn't satisfied. He gets out to apprehend the man, and he shoots him across the hood and runs up Patton and down Jefferson Street, and he laid it all out very
Bill
good.
Brown wholeheartedly believes Oswald was walking west.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he was walking west, not east. I just want to jump right into it. I think these are some stuff that I think some people not forget about, but sort of overlook, or it's not mentioned enough. The closest witness was a man named Domingo Benavides, which we talked about. And fun fact, the Warner report actually misspelled his name. It's actually spelled Benavidez. That's, yeah. Anyway, he described the killer this way: about 5'11", had a complexion a little bit darker than average. Now he's Mexican American, so he said had a darker than average, a little bit ruddier than mine, had dark hair that was a little bit curly, and he looked like he needed a haircut for about 2 weeks, and had a hairline that sort of went tapered off and consisted of a square in the back. Does that sound like Oswald? Or? No. And this is the testimony I can show you guys after. There's a woman by the name of Helen Louise Markham. She talked with the FBI that day. This is her FBI statement from that day, November 22nd. She described the killer as about 18, black wavy hair, red complexion. Does that sound like the Oswald we've come to know and love all these years?
His face could have been flushed.
Yeah.
My face was flushed after walking from
You just killed somebody.
from the rooming house.
18, red complexion.
That's right.
Yeah, he was 24.
I often misjudge people's ages all the time. Let's let him finish.
Yeah.
She passed out on the scene. She said I fainted 3 or 4 times before the lineup. They had to give her smelling.
Right.
Thank you. They had to give her smelling salts.
Downtown.
They were thinking about transporting her to a hospital. She was given sedatives before the lineups, and she kept passing out during the lineup. That's in volume 20, page 587. She affirmed 6 times under oath that she did not recognize anyone in the lineup. Hold on, let me read it.
Can I ask a question?
Well, yeah, sure.
I thought she picked him out of the lineup.
Well, let me read you the testament.
Okay.
Mr. Ball, did you recognize anyone in the lineup? Mrs. Markham, no, sir. You did not? Did you recognize anyone from their face? From their face, no. Did you identify anybody in these 4 people? I didn't know nobody. I know you didn't know anybody, but did anybody in the lineup look like anybody you had seen before? No, I had never seen none of them, not one of these men. Not one of the 4? Not one of them. Not one of all 4? No, sir. And then she said, I looked at him. When I saw this man, I wasn't sure, but I had cold chills just run all over me. Okay. So that's the star witness. And
Can I ask you a question or not? I wonder if you don't want me to.
Huh?
Can I ask you a question or not?
At the end.
Okay,
At
cool.
the end, okay.
All right.
Sure.
He didn't butt in on you.
Yeah.
I know. That's why I asked.
Yeah. This is the star witness. They referred her as reliable, but behind the scenes, there's a memo where it says this witness is very unsure of herself on most points. It's up in the National Archives, and she was referred to behind the scenes as utterly unreliable, full of mistakes, contradictory, and worthless. And Joe Ball, who wrote the chapter on the Tippit murder, is actually a subchapter. It's not even a chapter. He called her an utter screwball in a public debate with Mark Lane in '64. So that's what they said behind the scenes, but what they said publicly in the Warren Report was that she was reliable. And Norman Redlick came out and said, and despite all this, they came out and said, quote, "The commission wants to believe Mrs. Markham, and that's all there is to it. The commission wants to believe Mrs. Markham. That's all there is to it." Oh, that'd be a nice bridge. I'll be done in about 5 minutes. Hold on. Here, would you hold this, Fred? Or? Let's go down the street a bit. Scoggins, the taxi driver, Scoggins, he was interviewed by the FBI. Hold on, I'm going to read it verbatim. Okay, Scoggins, a taxi driver, who said he was walking west on 10th Street. Okay, wait, I gotta see which one happened first. Okay, they showed him a photo lineup, Scoggins, a taxi driver, and he admitted in his testimony that he picked out the wrong photo. He picked out a man other than Oswald. That is Volume 3, page 335, and the FBI showed him a picture of Oswald, and it says right here, Mr. Scoggins stated after viewing a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald, he could not be sure the person he had observed in Oak Cliff on November 22nd was actually identical with Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay, let's get to these the lineups. In the Friday lineups, Oswald was thrown in with 3 men in dress attire. One of them had a red vest, another one had a nice knit sweater, and one had a sport coat, and one other wore a sport coat on the other day, or one of the other lineups. And so these are the picture. As I said, one of them. This picture is a little misleading, but one of them was wearing a sport coat. Another one was wearing a nice knit sweater. Another one was wearing a nice red vest.
But they weren't wearing suits.
One was wearing a suit.
No, he wasn't. Not a tie.
One was wearing a sport coat.
Right, but he wasn't wearing a tie.
And on the second day, Lee was thrown in with 2 teenagers and a Hispanic. So, I mean, you don't have to be too bright to know who the suspect is. I'm not being facetious. Let's see. Sorry, the wind's blowing and everything.
Get that other sheet.
And all this about the lineups is in Volume 7. They actually took testimony of each person in the lineup, which I think a lot of people forget about. One of the guys was brown hair, dark complexion. Another guy named Clark was blonde. He had blonde hair in the lineup. He had a ruddy complexion. Another one had dark hair, had ruddy complexion. I think a lot of people forget about this. The witnesses did not view the lineup separately. Sam Ginyard said that he and Ted Calloway were in the lineup together, so they're sitting right next to each other.
Very improper.
Very improper.
Yeah.
Very improper.
I don't think anybody disagrees with that.
They were sitting right next to each other.
Did Lavelle do the lineup?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ginyard and Calloway were together at the lineup, and the 2 Davis sisters, Virginia and Barbara, were also together, sitting right next to each other at the lineup. I lost my page. Hold on. And Scoggins and the other taxi driver who drove Oswald, Whaley, they were also together. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who were all together. Not together, they were all together. And I believe Elmer Boyd, I have to look at my notes. Elmer Boyd even admitted in his testimony Volume 7, page 125, he admitted under oath that the police lineups, that they were dressed better than Oswald. And Fritz had testified that the people in the lineup had fixed themselves so that they would look like prisoners, which they did not have.
Yeah, I think most agree that they screwed up. They screwed
Yeah.
up.
Yeah,
There's
plenty
of
criticisms to be made. You still got more?
Yeah, there was.
I got a few more. Hold on. I got to see where I am because I lost. I can do the rest without that.
I got 3 minutes on my battery.
Okay. Okay. I talked about this. He was thrown in with men in dress attire, 2 teens and a Hispanic. They didn't resemble Oswald. Eisenberg, who took the testimony of in Volume 3, Commission Counsel Eisenberg said on the record, there's a slight problem here with the ballistics evidence, which I think is an understatement. Even Boggs said at one point, what proof do you have, though, that these are the bullets? I kind of think of Hillary when she's like, what difference at this point does it make? So Boggs said, what proof do you have that these are the bullets?
Please don't ruin your presentation.
bullets or casings.
He said bullets. That's Volume 3, page 477.
He probably meant shells.
The shells
Did
are
he
not
mean shells?
shells are not listed on the police report. Police weren't the shells weren't entered into evidence for 6 days.
Ballistic testing on shells is useless, except unless you're nickel.
Domingo, who found the first 2 shells, they took the 4 shells over to him. They wanted him to pick out the 2 that he found, and he was unable to pick out the shells that he had found that day. And the Davis sisters were shown the shells, and they could not pick out the shells as the ones that they found that day.
That's not even a procedure today. You wouldn't do
Procedure?
that. No,
Yeah.
you wouldn't ask witnesses, are these
They
the
said,
shells you
"Are
found?"
these the shells?"
Yeah,
And they
that's-
said, "We can't identify the
That's exactly why they don't do that
The
anymore.
manufacturer
And,
makes thousands of them, so how can you pick
Are
out
these
the
the
right one?
shells you saw? I don't know. How am I supposed to know?
And then Sergeant Barnes initialed the 2 shells that Domingo found. Says he initialed them and they disappeared. They're not on there. Brown initialed the Davis sister shells, and so did Officer Doherty. Doherty, their initials are not there. He said I took a ballpoint pen and put my initials there, and those aren't
In ink or engraved?
engraved, and they weren't there.
What I said was Doty picked up the 1 shell, carved his initial on the inside of the hull, and gave it over to Pete Barnes. That's all I said about market shells. That GD is on that shell today in the National Archives.
Yeah, Marina was not able to identify the jacket in evidence. She said in her testimony, it seems he had that one. It seems he had that one. But they said that that she identified it. Helen Markham said she had never seen the jacket in evidence before when they handed it to her. Scoggins said, I thought it was darker. Barbara Davis said the killer wore a black coat. And when she was shown it, she said, no, that's not the one. William Arthur Smith said the killer wore a sport coat. Ted Calloway said, I think it had more tan to it. Ron Reynolds said it was a bluish jacket, so dark-ish jacket. The jacket in evidence was only sold in California and Philadelphia, both where Oswald had not lived as a civilian. And so those are some of the highlights.
You can't take jackets over the state line pretty much.
It had a some kind of clothing.
I know I'm trailing off a bit, and I know those are some of the key points that I think a lot of people don't really talk about.
Can I ask you a question?
Talk about as much. Hold on. Talk about as much. And by the way, everything I just mentioned is not in the book with Malice. Everything I just mentioned is not in that book. And Mrs. Donald Higgins said, Mrs. Donald Higgins, she said, he, the killer, definitely was not the man they showed on television. Witness Jimmy Burt said he told reporter Al Chapman, the man that I saw kill Tippit was not Lee Harvey Oswald. I got a good look at him. I'm sure it wasn't Oswald. It just didn't look like him. So those are some of the highlights. I know I kind of trailed off and I'm stuttering a little bit. But,
What does it mean if...
So hold on.
So those are some of the things that I think are overlooked sometimes. Any questions?
Yeah, you're probably right. They're overlooked. I was just going to say, like, what does it mean when you have one person who thinks they can identify, or several people who think they can identify a person, and then one person that says that's not the person? Does human error, mistakes.
Talking about the lineups, the shells.
Yeah, does human perception, memory, those recollection, all that kind of thing, does that come into play when you consider whether something is true or not? And also, do you consider corroboration of witnesses that give certain accounts? Like, for example, there's corroboration of the witnesses that did identify Oswald, and that corroboration is the shell casings or the weapon. You didn't criticize the weapon.
The weapon.
Yeah.
No.
So, what do you think about that when there's corroboration?
I mean,
then when you have the other side, there is no corroboration. So,
what's your question?
The question is, how do you feel? What importance do you give to witnesses who are backed up with other things like evidence?
What's an example?
Corroborated.
Or
What's
like
an example?
About the cops had.
Because there's
What do
a
you-
person that
I don't
says
understand what
there's
you're
a
talking
person
about.
that says it's not Oswald, correct?
Yes.
And there's other people that said it was.
Eight other witnesses said that it were unable to pick Oswald. Yeah.
Unable to pick was not the same as that's not him.
Yeah. Well, just goes to
positive,
show.
negative, and
Well, just goes to show, like what he said. So
How do you value witnesses that are backed up with something else other than just what they say?
what has to go about what?
Let me ask this question for you.
Sure.
You called Helen Markham. You didn't directly call it, but another screwball.
Yeah.
She's corroborated, though. That's what he's trying to ask you. So, does she get any credibility besides just being another screwball? Even though because she's
I didn't call her a
corroborated.
screwball, yeah.
No, but you quoted it.
Yeah.
Okay. So she's corroborated by other witnesses. So just because Ball called her an utter screwball, does she all of a sudden lose the credibility of being corroborated by the other witnesses? That's
About
basically
being
what you're trying to
corroborated
ask, I
about
think,
being
basically,
corroborated
yeah.
being corroborated about what specifically?
About the identification of Oswald, for example.
Well, I just read you the testimony. She didn't.
Okay,
She didn't recognize
which
anyone.
leads me to my next question. So let me ask you this: take the Warren Commission investigation, pretend like it didn't even happen. Seriously, pretend like Oswald lived, went to trial, got found guilty or innocent, whatever. How does any of what happened after November 22nd, 1963, change the fact that on November 22nd, 1963, she said number 2 is the man I saw shoot the officer, and she picked out the number 2 man. So point being, how does confusion during testimony 6 months later negate the fact that she positively picked Oswald on November 22nd, 1963? And then another thing is, the other witnesses in relation to your point about the other fellows in the lineup not resembling Oswald, while I'll agree, and I think everybody will, that the Dallas police should have done a hell of a lot better job with the lineups. I don't have a problem with that. I've never said that the lineups were perfect. What I've said was the witnesses picked Oswald out of the lineup. These witnesses were not asked, which one of these 4 are you going to pick? These witnesses were asked, is the man you saw any of these 4?
My book ahead.
You see what I'm saying? So my point is, just because they picked Oswald in a lineup amongst other fellows who may not have resembled him to the point maybe it should have, they still picked Oswald.
Well,
So you're talking about innocent American citizens picking a man that could send his ass to the electric chair, not just because he was the one of the 4 who most resembled, because the other 3 obviously weren't, but because he was the one they saw.
Well, Oswald had a cut and a black eye and disheveled hair. How could not anybody not notice that? I mean, and he's yelling and screaming at the same time, purposely, I think.
If it had gone to court, the lineup would have been thrown out. I mean, I believe.
But how does the confusion 6 months later negate the testimony, the identification on November 22nd?
I think she might have been confused when she gave her warrant.
She was confused as hell what he was asking her.
Because it seems
Do you
like
know any of them?
Yeah,
No, I
it
don't
seemed
know
like
any
she
of
was
them.
trying to answer.
Have you ever seen any of them?
Yeah, do you want know one of these guys? No, I don't know those guys. I think that's what she was trying to say.
She said, "Did you recognize?"
But you know what? After that confusion, which he didn't tell you guys, and I'm sure you guys probably know though, number 2 was the man I saw shoot the officer.
Yeah,
It's a direct quote.
They
from
were
Helen
like,
Markham.
okay,
well, that's after she
picked this guy
she
out
realized.
of the lineup.
But this is
so
what she
what's
said.
the deal? Oh yeah, number 2 was the guy.
Yeah.
She said, "From their face, no, I didn't know nobody. I had not seen none of them, none of these men, not one of them. When I saw this man, I wasn't sure, but I just had cold chills run all over me."
And then one more point I want to make. You said Jimmy Burt told reporter Al Chapman,
yeah.
that man was not Oswald. Okay, what article did that appear in?
There is an interview, raw.
I'll just say
interview.
the National Enquirer is where that appears.
No, there's a
It did.
interview
It's
that
the National
he did.
Enquirer, like in 1969.
But we have the raw
He's
interview.
quoted as saying that the man.
But
was
we
Oswald.
have 1968. We have the raw interview transcript.
And Elvis.
That's not in the.
was
That,
living in Alabama
With that boy.
we have the raw interview transcript. So I mean, it's right.